choose your one. It's all going to be challenging us to choose one, to think about one that you can be praying for, reaching out to, sharing the gospel with. And so that's going to be a challenge ongoing for really the series, but we want it to be something that continues because it's all about one. As you just add one more, that's how the church grows. And we'll look into that a little bit more, especially in our text today. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 4, verse 18. Matthew 4, 18, if you want to go ahead and turn in your Bibles there. Matthew 4, verse 18. So what we learn, as you're turning there, from church history and a little bit more, is that Christians were first called Christians in Antioch. Right? That's what the Bible tells us. In Acts, it says that that's when they were first called Christians. Before that, they were just called simply followers of the way, knowing that Jesus was the way, the truth, and the life. But one of the things we see, even before followers of the way, is that they were simply known as disciples. And one of the things that, this is actually something that J.D. pointed out. I was reading something by him, and he was talking about this, and he said, we've gotten so used to the term Christian that it's comfortable. You can go out in the street right now and ask people if they're Christians, and you probably get a pretty favorable response. Now, depending on where you're at, you might not, but for the most part, people are pretty open still about calling themselves Christians. But when you start saying, well, are you a disciple? They start getting a little iffy. I don't know what that means. Right? Because Christian can get comfortable. It doesn't mean as much as it used to. Back then it was a derogatory term, meaning little Christ. It was meant to make fun of the Christians, and we just owned it. But now it's comfortable. Christian now means, well, I come to church every night. Right? Christian now means, well, I kind of like some of the things that Jesus taught. But disciple is something that calls you to more than that. Disciple actually tells you, no, you're a follower. You're not just affiliated with Jesus, you're with Him. You're going to follow where He leads. And I'm not saying we shouldn't use the word Christian. You'll still see me call myself a Christian. I hope you still identify as a Christian. It's not a bad word, but you know as well as I do that people throw it around pretty lightly. But when we think about what it means to be a disciple, that's what we're going to be looking at in Matthew chapter 4, verse 18. Follow along as we read. Now while walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Immediately they left their nets, and they followed him. And going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets. And he called them. And immediately they left the boat and their father, and followed him. Let's pray. Father, as we read and study your word now, I pray that you speak in through it, as always. We need to hear from you, not from me. So God, speak. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. And so the first thing we see, these points are going to be simple. You probably know this text well, and the first point is a simple one. Jesus doesn't choose the best, He chooses the willing. Jesus doesn't choose the best, He chooses the willing. Now, as you approach this scene in the Gospel of Matthew, we need to realize some context, right? So we start going into the Gospel story. In Matthew, Jesus is baptized, and as soon as He's baptized, He's brought out of the water and He's led into the wilderness. Right? Which is sometimes, that's true for Christians. Well, this is why discipleship matters so much, right? When we see people saved, it's going to be one thing to see people saved. It's a whole other thing to see people discipled, which means to teach them what they need to know. Because we're so good about seeing people pop out of the water, and then we send them into the wilderness to be tempted by Satan, and they lose. But Jesus didn't, right? Jesus came up out of the water, He was tempted, He was led into the wilderness, He was tempted by Satan, but He did what Israel couldn't do. They were in the wilderness for 40 years, tempted, and gave in, and grumbled, and complained. And Jesus went into the wilderness for 40 days, was tempted, and He never gave in. He constantly returned Satan with Scripture, He responded, and Satan fled from Him. Then He came out of the wilderness, and He's ready to start His public ministry. And this is where we're going to see Him start picking His followers, and then going and doing His miracles. And right after He comes out of that, He sees these fishermen. He walks on the bank, He walks by them, He sees them, He calls them, and He says, follow me. Now, not only do we learn a little bit of the story, but this is one area where I think a little bit of historical context helps us as well. In Jewish life back then, at the age of 5, all the boys went to school. They had to go to school to learn the Torah. Right? And so they'd go and they learn the Torah, and that's the first 5 books of the Bible. So they've got Genesis through Deuteronomy down. and they go in it from 5 to 10 years old. So all the kids at 10 years old would know the Torah, first 5 books, and then only the best of the best continued on. At that point, at 10 years old, half of them, probably 80% of them, just went back to work. They went back to help their families and work. But at 10 years old, the brightest kids were able to continue. They said, okay, well, maybe you're in the top 20%. You're going to get to continue on through school. And what they're going to go learn is the rest of the Old Testament. Right? So everything through the prophets, the minor prophets, Jeremiah, Isaiah, all of those as well. And so they're learning the rest of the Old Testament. But then at age 17, it was pretty much done. Right? At age 17, everybody went back to work with their families, whatever they were doing. And if you wanted to continue on, you had to find a rabbi to study under. And the rabbis back then could be really selective because there was such high demand, and they didn't have to pick everybody. It was kind of an exclusive thing. So they wanted the best and the brightest. And so if a kid wanted to learn from the rabbi, a 17-year-old, he would go and sit at the rabbi's feet. And as a gesture that he wanted to learn from this rabbi, and then the rabbi could give him an exam, an oral test. He would be tested to see if this young man is the one he wants to be his mentee, or rather he was going to pass him on. And so they were very, very selective. And of course, if they did pass the test and they were able to be with that rabbi, then for the period after that, they would walk and do everything with their rabbi. They follow him, they try to copy him as much as possible. And the idea was that the rabbi could recreate himself in his student. But once again, that was like graduate school. It's only for the best. And so if you made it past 10, you were bright. If you made it past 17, you were bright. But if you weren't doing that, you weren't following a rabbi, and you went back to work, what it simply tells us is you didn't make the cut. So when we see this scene now, and we see Jesus walking beside the Sea of Galilee, and we see we see Simon, who's later called Peter, and Andrew, and we begin to see James and John all fishing. It's easy for us to conclude they didn't make the cut. They didn't have a rabbi that they were studying under. They were going back, they were fishermen. John MacArthur said this. He said, God skipped all the wise of the day. The great scholars were in Egypt. The great library was in Alexandria. The great philosophers were in Athens. The powerful were in Rome. He passed over Herodotus, the historian, and Socrates, the great thinker, and Julius Caesar. He chose men so ordinary it was comical. No rabbis, no teachers, no religious experts. Rather, God chose them because they were willing. And His choice was validation enough. You've heard this before. Jesus met and He built the 12, and the first people He chose were fishermen. This is why later in Acts, when Peter's preaching, and he's called by the Sanhedrin and others into a council, and they said, how's this guy talking? And how does he know so much? He's just a mere fisherman. Isn't he just a working man? How does he know all this truth? Well, it's because Jesus didn't choose the best. He chose the willing. We know this by experience. Sometimes the best players are on the beat. You know what I'm talking about? Anybody that played sports, football, basketball, baseball, I'm sure it doesn't matter. I'm not going to give credence to soccer. That's your sport. We just don't will acknowledge it. But everything else, right? The big three. And so, man, when you have those sports, I played basketball, so I remember distinctly we had, from all the way through high school, we had guys come and go that were awesome talented. I mean, they could jump like crazy. They could probably dunk when they were in 7th grade, which was me. I'm just happy to touch the net at that point. And they're over there dunking. They could run fast. They could dribble. They could shoot. And they couldn't listen to a coach to save their lives. Right? They'd go, they'd mess up, and it didn't matter how talented they were. Almost every one of those guys never made it. They'd last for a few practices, maybe a few games, and they'd quit. They couldn't take it. But then there was this guy on the B team. He was always the one in practice. He always showed up early. He always did his best. He always worked hard. He was always ready whenever the coach called his number. He played his position. He played his role. He knew the fundamentals. He wasn't the most athletic or talented, but he was willing. He worked hard. And it showed that by the time, who lasted on the team? Those guys. Not the A players. That's not saying that some of the talented guys didn't make it. They did. But it's because they're also willing and hardworking. So we just know that it isn't always about who's the best. It's who's willing to do it. Jesus, when He walks on the Sea of Galilee, He could have went and He could have called many a bright man, but He chose fishermen. And I don't think that's a mistake. Right? One of the things we got to go ahead and get out of our mind real quick is that we're not good enough. So we can say that all the time about ourselves. We're not good enough. But don't we sound like everybody else in the Old Testament that complained? And the New Testament. But just think about the Old Testament for a minute, right? Moses, he didn't think he was good enough. David didn't think he was good enough. Gideon, he didn't think his army was big enough. All the time, God uses all the weak things, the broken things, the things that weren't necessarily good enough to do His awesome work. And the reason He does that is so that when it's finished, you'll know that you didn't have anything to do with it to heal. Well, that's a good thing, right? God actually wants to use you as an instrument for His glory. And so when you're done with it, you get to point everybody to Him, and you can't say anything about yourself. Right? People that think they get full of themselves, they go and they share Christ maybe, and that's a good thing. And Paul even says that. He says, some share me in truth and others in pretense. This is in Philippians. But he says, even the ones that go, they get kind of full of themselves, they're doing it for their own purpose. Souls are changed, but he said they've received all their glory. They think it's all about them. It's not. Right? Because it's not about who's the best, it's who's willing. One of the things I think we can easily fall into is making that excuse that we're not good enough. If I had to make a conclusion, I don't have any stats to give you, but one of the main reasons I say many people don't participate in personal evangelism, which is what Who's Your One's all about. I repeat that. It's challenging you to think of it just one, not to think about everybody, because you can't reach them all at once. But just focus on one at a time. But the call is to share Christ with them. Many people don't do it because they feel inadequate. But then I would say, as I've already said, I think that's more likely an excuse than an actual reason. So here's the thing. I want to ruin your excuse. I'm going to ruin any excuse you have. You may be one of those people and you say, well, that's just not my gifting. I can't do that. Right, that's for somebody else to do. Well, either you're right or God is right. And so I'm kind of going to go with Him. Right? See, that's one of the things we can immediately say, well, that just isn't me. Well, I'm here to tell you that the Bible doesn't tell you that anybody can set out on this command. This isn't something for you to say, well, all I do is sit back and do this and everybody else does that. No. He doesn't make room for that. Yeah, there are gifts in the church. We go through and we look in 1 Corinthians and other places. We begin to see all these different giftings that people have. Gifts of mercy, gifts of giving, gifts of being able to share in evangelism. But that being said, it never says, well, unless you fall into this gift, you don't have to go and make disciples and share the gospel with all nations, teaching them to obey Christ. I mean, no. It never gives us that right. We don't have a right to sit out on God. None of us have a right to sit the sidelines. If you truly feel that way, you need to realize that God doesn't care about how talented you think you are. He only asks you to be willing. But my fear is that the excuse when you say you're not the best is really because you're not willing. God isn't mocked. You can pass the line with someone else, but be true to yourself. You either accept or reject what God's called you to do. If you accept it, then I want you to know God's your strength. He's the one that's going to use you. Stop trying to rely on what you think God needs from you and just give Him you. He already knows what He's working for. But then we don't only see that. We don't see that He just doesn't choose the best, He chooses the willing. But then we see that to follow Him, we have to leave all. That's the second point. To follow Him, we have to leave all. Now, in these two episodes, all four of the men are fishing. All four of them. And we see immediately Simon and Andrew. He goes and he says, I'm going to call you to be fishers of me. Follow me. I'm going to make you fishers of men. And it says immediately they left their nets and followed him. They didn't I'm afraid of it. Isn't that the worst one? Jesus walks by. Could you imagine Simon and Andrew sitting there fishing? Jesus walks by and sees Galilee. Follow me. I'm going to make you fishers of men. I like that idea, Jesus. Let me pray about it. I'll get back to you now. Send me your cards. Leave me your contact information, Jesus, and I'll give you a call back when I think and I pray about it. God gives me the answer. No. That's what they did. They immediately went and did it. And then we see the same thing, James and John, but it tells us a little bit more. It says they're on the boat with their father, mending their nets, and he says he called them, and immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him. To follow him, we have to leave it all. We think about this. This was their livelihood. This wasn't a time of leisure, right? It's something like the world we live in today. Many people still work hard, but many of us can also take vacation. Many of us have some time off. Many of us have times of leisure. We work and prepare for it. But here, they didn't nearly have that much time for leisure. It wasn't readily available reality. And so they needed to work in order to live. To step away from it would cost them a lot. And to completely forsake their trade, which is what they're doing, would cost them everything. They were leaving their jobs. And yet, that's what they did. Peter and Andrew followed. They leave their nets. Matthew, as I was going to tell you, James and John, they left their father. They were willing to leave their careers and their relationships. Now, let me be clear about this. This isn't them stepping out on some sort of responsibility. Right? So it isn't like I'm saying here, to follow him we have to leave all. That means husbands and wives can go and do whatever they want to do. No, there's a certain thing that's responsibility. The Bible tells us husbands and wives have responsibilities to one another. You have a responsibility to your immediate family. You have a responsibility, the Bible teaches us, to your family that is alien cities. Right? We read about that in 1 Timothy and 1 and 2 Timothy, as it says, take care of those who are in your own family. And so there is that idea. So that's not what we're seeing here. But the picture here isn't James and John's feeble father. It's James and John's father who's working in the boat. And he says, no, you do got to leave him. He does challenge our allegiance. He says, yeah, I know you love your family. Your family time and your priorities, though, have they turned out to be more important than God? Then it's out of line. John Piper, you heard me mention his name, a pastor in Kentucky. He tells one famous story. I love it. It was a short idea. He said that he actually was preaching one time and a girl answered the call to missions. And so she went full-fledged with it. She believed God was calling her to be a missionary. And so she was going to be moving overseas, and she wasn't going to be a short-term missionary. She was going to be there for life. At least that was her plan. And John Piper says it wasn't long after that, he got emails and phone calls from her father, who, I believe he said, I might get the details wrong, so don't hold me to that, who he said I think was a committed Christian, but yet was giving John Piper death threats if he didn't change his daughter's mind. Because he didn't want his daughter to get leave. And he was mad at John Piper for preaching in such a way that she felt called to. That's a priority that's out of line. The mission was more important than being in your family, and the same is true for us. Regardless, we see they left it all behind. They were willing to leave behind careers. They were willing to leave behind family and go and follow him wherever he called. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he might not call them far away. He did them, and many of them would end up being martyred for their faith. But the thing is, are you willing to? Are you willing to leave it all? Is your allegiance lying with him, or is it lying in other people? There's and it's a hard story, but C.S. Lewis, I bet y'all didn't know I was going to bring him up. C.S. Lewis wrote a play called The Great Divorce. It's a book and it's a play. He put it in a play. And in The Great Divorce, it's kind of weird. If you read it, it's confusing. But in it, basically what they're doing is that the lost souls in, you can call it hell or at least death, they sort of visit heaven. Right? And he's not trying to stick to the Bible here. He's trying to make a point. So don't read it and think C.S. Lewis is like some crazy guy. But he's writing this, and they're trying to they go to see heaven, and there's this mother who lost a child. And she goes up and she's talking to one of the angels or the spiritual beings that's there. And he's trying to convince her to come on. But what he can't get past is the only reason she wants to go there and go to heaven is to see her child. And to which he responds, you got to want to see Jesus first. And then he'll come. He'll be there. But you got to want him first. And then she goes, no, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. And that's kind of the point he was making. Right? An allegiance that lies even above. See, what we see in the Gospels and then later in Paul and all plenty of times is this idea of self-denial. Paul in Acts 20:24, when he's going to Jerusalem, he knows he's going to be locked up. And he says, I count my life as of no value or any worth to myself, if only I may give my life for the gospel. Right? Do you really think Paul didn't care about his life? He did. He knows life's valuable. And I bet, apart from the fact that he was always getting beat and persecuted, I bet he kind of liked some aspects of life. But when he says, my life is of no value, what he means is, in comparison to God's call, my life is of no value. His call takes all precedence, all priority over it. To follow Him, we have to forsake it all. He calls you to leave it. Whether you have to or not afterwards is up to Him. But where's your allegiance? Lottie Moon, here's a story. I got this straight from IMD's website. You can find this if you look it up. It says, when she set sail for China, of course this is our Christmas offering that's named after her. When she set sail for China, Lottie was 32 years old. That's oftentimes when most people think they're so settled they can't do anything. I'm 32. I'm not doing anything else. Right? I'm on this track that God's got me on, so ride it out to the end. But no, at 32, Lottie went to China. She turned down a marriage proposal, left her job, home, and family to follow God's lead. Her path wasn't typical for an educated woman from a wealthy southern family. God had gripped her with the Chinese people's need for a Savior. Lottie wrote letters home detailing China's hunger for truth and the struggle of so few missionaries taking the gospel to the 472 million Chinese in her day. She also shared the urgent need for more workers and for Southern Baptists to support them through prayer and giving. She once wrote home to the Foreign Mission Board. Listen what she said to them. This is the IMB now. It used to be called the Foreign Mission Board. She says, please say to the new missionaries that are coming to a life of hardship, responsibility, and constant self-denial. Disease, turmoil, and lack of co-workers threatened to undo Lottie's work, but she gave herself completely to God and helped lay the foundation of what would become the modern Chinese church. And if you didn't know this, the modern Chinese church, one of the fastest growing Christian movements in the world. We think about China now and you still think, well, they're communist? Yeah, not really, because they sure make a lot of money selling stuff to us, right? But we think, well, they're still pretty restrictive, aren't they? They have an underground church that's thriving. It says her legacy lives on. And today, when gifts aren't growing as quickly as the number of workers God is calling to the field, her call for sacrificial giving rings with more urgency than ever. Here's the concern. In our consumeristic culture, too many people think they can order a subscription. I want to have a subscription to him. That way I can use him when I need him. And if I don't need him, I can cut it off. It doesn't work that way. The time you trusted Christ as your Savior was not a negotiation process. If it was, I want to tell you, you probably need to be saved. There was no negotiation. The negotiation was simple. Give me your all. Give me your life. And I'll give you more life than you could ever imagine. I'll give you greater purpose than you could ever imagine. But there was none of this. You can have part of me, Jesus. Jesus is never satisfied with just part of us. He asked us to give Him everything, which is why we mentioned Paul was willing to lay his life on the line. Paul was willing to say, not even after that he was willing to go to Jerusalem and suffer and even die. The question is, what are you holding on to that's keeping you from reaching out to one? To one. So we already know that if you're willing, God will use you. So then this next piece is, if you're going to follow Him, you're going to leave it all. But have you left it all? Is the things still gripping for your heart? Of course there are. We live in a world full of sin. You still got things that are constantly trying to take that place. Constantly things trying to pull your allegiance away. But the question isn't, are you struggling with it? The question is, are you willing to drop it? Are you willing to follow it? If He was here, would you say immediately, I'll go? Or would you pray about it? I know I mentioned that twice, but before we go on the third point, there's a reason for that. Of course, I'm saying it playfully. Y'all know what that means. When someone says they're going to pray about something, it pretty much means no. Right? You ask somebody to sign up for something, and they say they're going to pray for it, it means no. And especially here. Now, sometimes people really do. I don't want those of you that are really good and committed, that actually do go home and pray about it, and the Lord tells you yes, and you sign up, thank you for doing it. Right? For those of you that don't, and you just say it because you don't want anybody to guilt trip you, shame on you. Right? But that being said, one of the things, and this goes back to our first point, and it kind of goes with our next one, you don't have to pray about whether God's called you to witness. He has. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There's nothing you got to go looking for. He tells us in His Word right there. He tells us. And so, there's things we might be holding on to that are keeping us from it. We need to let them go. We need to be willing to leave all. And then we see the final point. He commands us to spiritually reproduce. He commands us to spiritually reproduce. Now, of course, the greatest aspect of this episode is not just that Jesus called them, but it's what he called them to. He didn't really change their profession. He just changed their focus. You guys are good fishermen. Stop fishing for tilapia. That's what we ate when we were in Israel. That's what Sea of Galilee is actually fresh water. So no flounder in Sea of Galilee, but there was tilapia. And so me and Nicole ate tilapia, and it was fried, and there was the eyeball still in it. Nicole really liked it. It was delicious. And then afterwards, they give you some coffee and dates. And it was coffee so strong, you shave your legs that morning, you hear that, right? Anyway, that being said, which I did, obviously. No, that being said, we ate tilapia. He says, no longer are you going to be fishing tilapia, you're going to be fishers of men. And they didn't immediately, because Jesus begins to get them to follow him. It is a different period here, but it wasn't long before Jesus used them to spread the word. If you remember, he sent them out, told them to go and share. They sat and learned, and then they went and told. And they did so because they were commanded to. Matthew 28, 19 and 20 is the place I'm going to tell you, right? When I say you don't have an excuse and he's already told you what to do, there's plenty of places you can go, but there's probably any place any clearer, and you've heard it repeated over and over again here. You want to know that I know that everybody here is supposed to go and witness, and there's not really any excuses in one way or the other, because Matthew 28, 19 and 20 says, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even until the end of the age. He didn't say, go therefore those who I've called for this specific gifting and make disciples. He said, go. Everybody, go. Make disciples. Share. You're commanded to spiritually reproduce. It's a command just as much as we're commanded not to lie. That we have sin when we lie, but we also have a sin if we don't do what God's called us to do. And he said, you're going to be my witnesses. This is in Acts, in Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the earth. We're called to spiritually reproduce. We're called to be fishers of men. Our faith isn't a dormant faith. We can't be saved and then sit on it. Or share it. You may have heard this story before. It's one I love. If you don't recognize the name, you may recognize the name Edward Kimball. Edward Kimball. Well, here's a neat little story. Edward Kimball is a Sunday school teacher. He was teaching, and he taught a bunch of rambunctious boys. And there was one boy in his class that was one of the worst. And he was constantly on this boy about trying to get him to stay in church and come to church and ultimately come to Christ. And Edward Kimball even sought him out outside of church, went and found him, and began to witness to him and try to lead him to the Lord. And he did. Well, that boy's name was Dwight Moody. Dwight Moody, famous preacher, he was preaching. And a man named Wilbur Chapman was converted at a Dwight Moody evangelistic meeting. Billy Sunday, you might know that name, he was really instrumental in all the crusades that Billy Graham would eventually team up with, but he started some of that really early on. Billy Sunday was converted at a Chapman meeting. And then, while Billy Sunday was preaching, a man named Mordecai Him got saved, which is a sweet name, but that's another issue. Mordecai Him was converted at a Billy Sunday meeting. And then there was this teenager who was really skeptical about church and Christianity and didn't really think nothing of it, but figured he'd go see what all the fuss was about when Mordecai Him was preaching. And of course, you may already know that teenager was Billy Graham, who attended a Mordecai Him meeting and then trusted Christ as his Savior. And then we know the rest. Billy Graham, who went on to preach to thousands and thousands and thousands all across the world. But look where it started. A Sunday school teacher that sought after one. A Sunday school teacher who realized he was responsible for one. In his book, Robert Coleman, it's a book called The Master Plan of Evangelism, he said this. He said, when will the church learn this lesson? Preaching to the masses, although necessary, will never suffice in the work of preparing leaders for evangelism. Nor can occasional prayer meetings and training classes for Christian workers do this job. Individual women and men are God's method. God's plan for discipleship is not something, but someone. What's he saying there? He's saying there's nothing here at Hopewell Baptist Church that we could put in place that's going to take the place of people. There's no special program, no silver bullet, nothing we could do. And then he goes on to say, while many people are reached, at something like a crusade. We think about Billy Graham preaching to thousands. We think about some mega churches today that draw in big numbers. Preaching to the masses is necessary. But the biggest life change and the best mode of evangelism always has been and always will be individual women sharing. It's pretty simple math. If we think about our congregation, let's say we have 70. Say 70 come. Everybody commits to one. Let's just be nice and say half of them don't want to hear anything you got to say. The other half might attend church. Maybe some of them make decisions. Let's just say attend church. You just added 35 people. And you told 35 more that didn't want to have nothing to do with you, but that ain't on. You did what you were responsible for. One of the things we think about is, we've said this, when you walk outside these doors and you go to work and you go shopping and you encounter so many people that all have an eternal destiny somewhere. But when we think about that, it can be overwhelming. Only thing you can do is start shouting at the corner of Walmart. Nobody's doing that, right? It can be overwhelming. How am I going to reach all these people? I can't reach all these people, so I'm just going to mind my own business and go through mine. Well, we're not telling you to reach all those people. We're saying focus on one. As I was praying and preparing for this series, I was thinking about myself. Oftentimes, my normal routine is church stuff. Right? I'm either visiting, or I'm here, or I'm leading a Bible study, and all these other things. And I said, you know what? When I get home, I just sit down with Nicole. I don't really go to many places. Who am I running into? But I go to the gym. And so I've already met my one at the gym. I've been praying for him, talking to him, and committing to sharing the gospel with him as soon as the time opens up. And so far, just getting to know him and talk with him. You have people that you run into that walk away on your heart. It's easy to get distracted by many things. But y'all, the purpose of the church, every church, and this church, is to spread the gospel. The same is true for your life. We have a responsibility to go fishing. We're called to reach a lost world, and so our series is going to challenge us to answer that call. On Wednesday nights, we will be having a special time of going through an evangelism tool called the 3 Circles. On Wednesday night, we have a DVD Bible study called Life on Mission, and it's just you've probably done these things before. You may have heard of Romans Road, you might have heard of Evangelism Explosion, did training, all these different types of training things. Billy Graham and him put out, Billy Sunday and those put out the 4 spiritual laws and things like that. It's the same type of thing, it's just one more. You already comfortable with something, use it. This is just a little bit of training that we are going to offer so you can know how to share the gospel with somebody. But what we want to focus on right here and now is, are you willing to? Do you want God to use you, His great plan, His great purpose? Because I'm telling you, but it will. When Jesus came and we see Him call these 4 men, one thing we need to remember, Jesus wasn't ever concerned necessarily with the masses. He was concerned with the 12. He taught them. He led them. Oftentimes He would share things in parable to the masses they didn't even understand. And then He'd tell the 12 of them. He always focused in on the 12. And then He's going to, because He knows that they were going to go out and share. I'm here to tell you, He wants you to do the very same thing. Yours focus, yours means. I want to simply challenge you to think about who your one is. And I want you to begin even praying for them this week. Next week, in your bulletin, you're going to have a little slip. It's going to have a space for you to write down who your one is. And you just got to put a first name. We'll go over all that. But I want you to just put a first name. We'll have a place for you to display that because we want to pray over them. When we were at the annual meeting, it was amazing because he asked, Johnny Hunt got up, if you know his name, and he got up and he asked everybody if they had their one. And he told them to pull out their phones. And you could put it in online actually, and they had this massive map up. And dots just started popping up all over the screen. Thousands and thousands already that have said they chose their one. And they're seeing people come to Christ, be baptized. That's what we want to do. We want to focus on what our purpose is. Because here's the thing. I don't know about you, but the greatest thing that ever happened to me was in June 6, 2006. when I gave my life to Christ. I remember that time like it was yesterday. I'm sitting in a hotel in Daytona, Florida, at youth camp in a ballroom. There was actually this ballroom had pillars in it, and I was actually right behind a pillar, so I couldn't see much. But I remember sitting there. I'd been listening. It was a Thursday night. I'd been listening to youth camp all the way from Sunday to Thursday, constantly feeling convicted. You know, they were given a time of invitation, and I remember responding, knowing that I knew a little bit about God, but I really didn't know anything about Jesus. I knew the things about church that you were supposed to go, but I didn't. But then when I went on this trip, and I realized, okay, so it's not just about church and going to it. It's not just about some character called God. It's about God who truly is, and He sent His Son to die for me. It's about the one who died on the cross and rose from the dead and said, guess what? If you trust in me, I'll give you grace and new life, but you got to give me everything. So which means all those plans that you had when you come to the altar, you leave them. And you let me tell you what to do next. Best act I remember. And then, of course, there's Jamie, and then Nicole gets third. Right? No, but hopefully you have a story like that. It might have been different. It might have been BBS. It might have been a Sunday morning. It might have been a parent that led you to Christ. But you have that story. Don't hold on. Don't just hold it in. We're called to tell. The world gets darker. Don't be surprised by it. It's supposed to. We're supposed to be light in a dark world. And as the days grow darker, the church is supposed to shine brighter. But the church can't shine brighter if we're constantly putting our flame under that. We're challenged to go and meet the one. As you stand with us and David comes and leads